She walked through the gate of Forward Operating Base Caraway at 7:14 on a Tuesday morning carrying a civilian hiking backpack, a thermos of coffee, and the unhurried energy of a woman who had arrived exactly when she intended to. No uniform. No identificación lanyard. No escort. Private First Class Kowalski, who had been manning the gate checkpoint for 11 months and considered himself a fair judge of situations, looked at her for approximately 3 seconds and concluded that she was lost. This was not an ungenerous conclusion. The nearest hiking trail was 4 miles north. People got confused. It happened. "Ma'am," Kowalski said, with the patient tone he reserved for civilians who had wandered into places they did not belong. "This is a restricted military installation." The woman looked at him. She had dark eyes and a quality of attention that Kowalski would struggle to describe later in the break room, settling eventually on. "She looked at me like she was reading the footnotes. "I know what it is," she said. She set her thermos on his checkpoint counter. "I'm expected." Kowalski checked his list. He checked it twice. He checked it a third time, which he would not admit to anyone. He did not find her name because her name was not on any list that Kowalski's clearance level gave him access to, which was the first of approximately 47 things about the situation that nobody at FOB Caraway would understand until a 4-star general arrived 48 hours later, and the entire base collectively realized it had been making the same mistake for 2 days straight. "Ma'am," Kowalski said again, rallying. "I'm going to need to see some identification." She looked at him for exactly 1 more second. Then she picked up her thermos. She took a sip. She looked past him at the base, at the training yard, at the motor pool, at the satellite array on the eastern perimeter, at the communications tower, at the command structure, in a slow and systematic sweep that lasted about 4 seconds and covered everything. "Get me your CO," she said. She said it pleasantly. That was the part Kowalski could not adequately explain afterward. She said it the way a person asks for a menu. Colonel Wade Briggs had commanded FOB Caraway for 3 years. He had the build of a man who had been physically imposing at 30 and had maintained it through discipline and stubbornness into his early 50s. He had the manner of a man who had been correct about most things for most of his career and had developed a comfort with that correctness that sat just on the favorable side of arrogance. He came to the gate in response to Kowalski's radio call with the brisk, purposeful stride of a man who expected to resolve a minor administrative situation in under 4 minutes. He looked at the woman. He looked at her backpack. He looked at her thermos. He looked at the complete absence of anything on her person that indicated she belonged inside the perimeter of a United States Army Forward Operating Base. "Ma'am," Briggs said. His voice had a quality of terminal patience that he had spent decades calibrating. "The hiking trail is approximately 4 miles in that direction." He pointed north. He was helpful like that. The woman looked at the direction he was pointing. She looked back at him. "Colonel Briggs," she said. "Not sir, not colonel, just the full name, the way you'd address someone you'd read a file on. My name is Maya Chun. I'm here for a standard operational assessment. I'll need access to your training yard, your communications array, your logistics records for the last 90 days, and a bunk. Anything in your supply inventory is fine. I don't need much space." Briggs looked at her for a long moment. "Do you have orders?" he said. "My office sent notification through your command chain 48 hours ago." "I received no such notification." She looked at him with the expression of someone who had just been told the sun rose in the west and had decided not to argue about it. "Then we have a communications problem," she said. "That's actually consistent with one of the things I'm here to assess." She picked up her backpack. "I'll take that bunk now." Briggs would later say, in the review that followed everything that followed, that he should have made a different call at that gate. That he should have escalated immediately, contacted his superior command, verified through proper channels. He would say it with the tone of a man who understood exactly where he went wrong and had done a great deal of thinking about the specific moment. What he said at the time was, "Kowalski, give her a bunk in the supply tent. Do not give her access to anything." He walked away. Kowalski showed her to the supply tent. She thanked him. She set up her bunk in 4 minutes. She was neat about it. Then she went to the mess hall and got eggs. Here is what you need to understand about FOB Caraway before I tell you what happened next. 412 soldiers. 3 senior officers. one command colonel, a training rotation that ran 3 cycles a month, a communications unit, a logistics unit, a medical unit, and a forward intelligence cell whose actual function within the base's operational structure was, according to every person on base who had tried to understand it, genuinely unclear. It was a professional environment. It was a competent environment. The people there were good at their jobs and took their work seriously and operated with the discipline you'd expect from individuals who had chosen the specific difficulty of military service. It was also, because 412 people live in close proximity and need entertainment, a place where a civilian woman who had apparently wandered in off a hiking trail convinced the colonel to give her a supply tent bunk, and then calmly eaten eggs in the mess hall became the most discussed topic on base within approximately 40 minutes. "She just walked in?" Torres said. He was the unit medic, 28 years old, with the particular quality of someone who asked questions primarily because he found the answers genuinely interesting rather than because he needed to do something with them. He was eating across from Kowalski in the mess hall. He kept looking at the woman 3 tables over who was eating eggs and reading something on a small tablet that she'd produced from her backpack. "She just walked in through the gate. Like she owned it," Kowalski confirmed. He had told this story 4 times in the past 30 minutes, and it was getting incrementally better with each retelling, which is the natural evolution of a good story in the hands of an enthusiastic narrator. "And Briggs gave her a bunk. In the supply tent." "The supply tent." Torres turned this over. "The supply tent with the broken heater and the cots from 2019? Those are the ones." Torres looked at the woman. She was eating eggs with the focused contentment of someone who had no immediate problems. "She doesn't look lost," he said. "She is absolutely not lost," Kowalski said, with the confidence of a man who had now committed to this narrative. "I'm telling you, Torres. She looked at this base when she came through that gate like she was memorizing it." Torres looked at the woman again. She glanced up from her tablet. She looked directly at Torres. Torres looked at his breakfast. "She saw you looking," Kowalski said. "I know," Torres said. "Did she seem mad?" Torres thought about the expression on her face. It had been brief and completely unreadable and had contained absolutely no component he would classify as anger or irritation. "She seemed," he said slowly, "like she was filing something." The first thing Maya Chun did after breakfast was walk the perimeter. Not quickly. Not obviously. She walked the way a person walks when they're getting familiar with a space which at a military base looks almost identical to the way a person walks when they're doing a detailed security assessment, and the difference between those two things is primarily a matter of who is doing the walking and why. Sergeant First Class Diane Price noticed. Price was 34 years old, had 11 years in, and had developed over the course of those 11 years the particular quality of attention that separates soldiers who survive ambiguous situations from soldiers who do not. She was not the kind of person who talked about what she noticed. She was the kind of person who noticed, filed it, and waited to see what the filing was worth. She watched Maya Chun walk the perimeter. She watched her stop at the communications tower for 45 seconds and look at the satellite array with her head tilted at approximately 15 degrees. She watched her spend 90 seconds at the motor pool and emerge having spoken to no one. She watched her find the Eastern Perimeter's emergency relay station, which was partially obscured by a corrugated equipment shed, and which most people on base were only vaguely aware existed, and spend 3 full minutes looking at it. Then Price went back to what she was doing because there was a training exercise in 40 minutes and she had things to prepare. But she kept a corner of her attention on Maya Chun for the rest of the day. That was Sergeant Price's character. She kept corners. The training exercise that afternoon was a simulated forward reconnaissance scenario. 40 soldiers, 2 objectives, 1 complicated and deliberately unclear intelligence briefing that Lieutenant Harmon had designed to test how units performed under informational ambiguity. Maya Chun sat on a supply crate near the observation point, where she had positioned herself with the permission of no one and watched. She had her thermos. Torres had been assigned to the medical observation post 10 feet away, which meant he was watching both the exercise and, with increasing and helpless fascination, the civilian woman on the supply crate who appeared to be running some kind of parallel commentary under her breath. "Blue team is going to lose the north approach in about 40 seconds, she said. Torres looked at her. Looked at the exercise. Blue team was moving confidently toward the north approach. "They look fine," he said. Second from left is holding his radio wrong. He's going to miss a transmission. When he does, the east flank won't know about the timing change and they'll move early. She sipped her coffee. There it is. Torres looked at the north approach. The soldier second from left fumbled his radio. A transmission cut out. On the east flank, 3 seconds later, a team moved 8 seconds before the signal. The north approach crumpled. How did you? Torres started. The radio was visibly misaligned when they staged, she said. It's a predictable failure point in that model under humid conditions. You see it in the grip. Torres stared at her. She watched the exercise. Red team's going to take the objective in 12 minutes, but they'll have a man down on the extraction. Why? Their extraction route goes through a kill zone their intelligence briefing deliberately obscured. Whoever designed the briefing wanted to see if anyone would catch it. She paused. Nobody caught it. 11 minutes and 43 seconds later, a soldier from Red Team went down in a simulated casualty at the extraction point. Torres sat very still on his medical observation post. He looked at the woman on the supply crate. She was looking at her tablet again, apparently having closed the exercise file in her mind and moved on to the next thing. Who are you? He said. She looked up. She had the expression of someone who had been asked a straightforward question and was genuinely weighing how much of a straightforward answer was appropriate. Hungry, she said. Is dinner at 1800? 3 days before Maya Chun walked through the gate at FOB Caraway, a signals technician named Reyes had been trying to repair the base's secondary communications relay. The relay had been down for 72 hours. Reyes had a technical degree, 4 years of field experience, and a deep and personal grudge against this specific piece of equipment. He had replaced 2 components. He had run diagnostics 17 times. He had read the manual, which he resented because he did not typically need the manual. The relay remained non-functional. On her first evening on base, Maya Chun walked through the signals room. She was not supposed to be in the signals room. The signals room required a clearance Kowalski had specifically told her she did not have access to. But the signals room had a door that had been propped open for ventilation because the air conditioning unit had also been experiencing difficulties, and she walked through it the way water moves through an open space, without announcing itself. Reyes was staring at the relay with the expression of a man having a very personal disagreement with an inanimate object. She looked at the relay. She looked at it for about 8 seconds. Then she opened her backpack. Can I ask what you're doing? Reyes said, with the tone of a man who was technically obligated to enforce access restrictions and also deeply curious. You've replaced the primary transceiver board, she said. But the fault isn't in the board. It's in the secondary coupling relay. The diagnostic reads as a board fault because the coupling failure causes the board to cycle incorrectly. So you're chasing the symptom. She pulled 2 components out of her backpack. They were small and unassuming and looked like the kind of components that live in the miscellaneous section of an electronics kit that most people have never opened. May I? Reyes looked at the components, looked at her, made a calculation about the relative value of access protocol versus 3 days of failed diagnostics. If you break it, he said. It's already broken. She fixed it in 11 minutes. Reyes stared at the functioning relay. He looked at her. She was repacking her backpack. Neat, efficient, every component back in its exact place. What is that? He pointed at her bag. What else is in there? Snacks, she said. Good night. She left. Reyes stood in front of his functioning relay and had several feelings in sequence. The story of the relay reached Kowalski by 0700 the next morning, because Reyes and Kowalski were in the same PT unit and Reyes was constitutionally incapable of sitting on information that good. The story of the relay reached Colonel Briggs by 0900, through his executive officer, who framed it as a minor access violation and a potentially significant security concern, and who also could not entirely suppress the detail that the relay had now been working for 14 hours. Briggs called Maya Chun into his office. She came in with her thermos. He looked at the thermos. He decided not to address the thermos. Ms. Chun, he said, you entered a restricted area without authorization. The door was open. That is not how restricted access works. No, she agreed. Pause. You repaired our secondary relay, he said. He said it as though it were an accusation, which it was, but not in any way he'd been trained to handle in 30 years of military command. It was bothering me, she said. Briggs looked at her steadily. He was a man who had interrogated people in difficult circumstances. He had looked at a great many people across a great many tables and extracted a great many things from them. The woman across his desk was drinking coffee from a thermos and looking back at him with an expression of complete and unconcerned openness that somehow conveyed absolutely no useful information. Who are you? He said. I told you at the gate. Maya-chan. Operational assessment. For whom? That information is above your current clearance authorization. The silence that followed was the kind that has temperature. It was cold. I have colonel's rank, Briggs said, with a precision that indicated he was very aware of this fact. Yes, she said. I know. And you're telling me an assessment of this base is being conducted by someone whose authorization exceeds my clearance. That is what I'm telling you, yes. Briggs sat with this. He was not a man who sat with things he didn't like, which meant the sitting took visible effort. Then I will be contacting my superior command to verify this situation. That's completely appropriate, she said. I'd expect nothing less. She stood. She picked up her thermos. Colonel, she said at the door. She turned. The route your Alpha unit is running in tomorrow's forward movement exercise. The one through the Bravo Quadrant Valley. I'd recommend running it through the Northern Ridge alternative. And why would I do that? She looked at him with that quality of attention. Not pressing. Not dramatic. Just stating. Because the valley route has a sightline vulnerability at the 2nd kilometer mark that an opposing observer could use to compromise the entire forward element. She paused. And because in a real deployment scenario, the difference between the valley and the ridge is the difference between a unit that comes home and one that doesn't. She left. Briggs sat in his office for 23 seconds after the door closed. Then he picked up his phone. Then he put it down. Then he picked it up again and called his superior command. He was told that no operational assessment for FOB Caraway had been formally logged through standard channels, that no orders had been issued from any level he had access to, and that the command officer he spoke with had never heard of a Maya-chan. He was also told that there were, however, several levels of command he did not have access to. This was not comforting information. That evening, Kowalski found himself at the obstacle course at 1945 hours for reasons that he would later describe as coincidental but which were, in fact, the direct result of a statement he had made at dinner to approximately 12 people. The statement was, "She's a civilian. I could lap her on the course." He didn't think she'd be there. She was there. She was at the starting position, wearing the same boots she'd arrived in, with her hair pulled back, looking at the course with the evaluative attention she brought to everything. "You don't have to do this," Torres said. He had come because Kowalski had invited him and also because he had the instinct, growing stronger by the hour, that wherever this woman was, interesting things happened. "I know," Kowalski said. He flexed. He was a large man and he was good on the obstacle course. He had times he was proud of. "Ma'am," he said to Maya-chan, with the elaborate courtesy of a man who is about to prove a point. "Ladies first." She glanced at him. She looked at the course. She looked at him one more time. Then she ran. Kowalski had a good time. He had a genuinely good time. He hit the wall, the rope climb, the crawl, the balance run, the jump sequence, and the final sprint with the kind of form that had taken years to develop. He came across the finish and bent forward, hands on knees, breathing hard. Maya-chan was standing at the finish holding a water bottle. His water bottle. She had taken it from his kit bag at the start, apparently, and brought it with her. She held it out. He took it. She had not broken a sweat. Or rather, she was breathing slightly elevated, the way a person breathes after meaningful exertion. But she had the particular quality of someone for whom meaningful exertion is a maintenance state rather than a maximum effort. "Good course," she said. She looked back at it. Whoever designed the wall section understands load distribution. The rope angle is slightly wrong for efficient grip, though. You lose about 4 seconds on the climb as a result. She looked at Kowalski. "You compensate well. Good upper body transfer." Kowalski stood at the finish line holding his water bottle. He was not sure if he had been complimented or assessed. "What was your time?" he said. She looked at her watch. "I wasn't racing," she said. "I was running the course." "What's the difference?" She almost smiled. "Racing is about you. Running the course is about the course." She picked up her backpack. "Drink your water, Kowalski. Recovery hydration matters." She walked away. Torres, who had watched the entire thing from the side, said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "She knew your name." Kowalski looked at him. "I'm the one who checked her in. She's never used it before." They stood there. "She was clocking something," Torres said slowly. "The whole time. She wasn't racing you. She was running the course and watching you run it." "Why would she be watching me run it?" Torres looked at the direction she'd gone. "I don't know," he said, "but I really want to find out." At 0300 on the second night, Torres couldn't sleep. He told himself it was the cot, which was genuinely uncomfortable. He told himself it was the bass sounds, which were the same bass sounds he'd been sleeping through for 8 months. He got up. He walked to the water point. He walked past the supply tent. There was a light inside. Not a bright light, a low, directional light, the kind you use when you're trying not to broadcast your position. Torres stopped. He stood outside the tent for a moment, weighing the social mathematics of looking through a gap in the canvas versus the very strong pull of his own curiosity. Curiosity won, as it generally did with Torres. He looked through the gap. Maya Chun was sitting cross-legged on her cot with a tablet, 3 printed map overlays, a compact device he'd never seen before and couldn't immediately categorize, and a notebook. She was writing in the notebook with a pen. An actual pen, blue ink, and the pages she'd already filled were dense with what looked, from his angle, like a combination of text, numerical calculations, and diagram sketches. She was working on something. Torres watched for approximately 30 seconds, feeling the specific guilt of a person who is doing something they know is moderately wrong and cannot make themselves stop, and was about to retreat when she said, without looking up, "Get some water and come in, Torres. You've been standing there long enough." Torres came in. He sat on a crate near the tent entrance. He held his water. The device on her cot was humming slightly. The map overlays showed the regional terrain surrounding FOB Caraway, with markings he didn't recognize in a notation system he'd never been taught. "You know why you can't sleep," she said. It was not a question. "The course," he said. "You watched me predict the exercise outcomes." "Yes." She looked up from her notebook. She looked at him with that quality of attention, the one that read the footnotes. In the low light of the tent, with the hum of the device and the map overlays spread around her, she looked like the world's most unsettling librarian. "Ask," she said. "Who are you?" he said. "Actually," she considered this. "Someone who does work that most people don't know exists," she said. "In places most people don't know exist. For reasons most people don't have clearance to be told." "Are you CIA?"
No,
"Gia." "That's closer. But not that."
no.
Torres looked at the maps. He looked at the device. He looked at the notebook pages, dense with calculations. He thought about the relay. He thought about the exercise. He thought about the obstacle course and the water bottle and the way she'd said recovery hydration matters with the precision of someone who tracked recovery data. "You're assessing us," he said. "The whole base." "I'm assessing several things." "Including Colonel Briggs?" A pause. Brief but a pause. "Why would you ask that?" she said. Torres thought about why he'd ask that. He thought about the way Briggs had come to the gate. He thought about the way she'd talked about the communications problem and said it was consistent with one of the things I'm here to assess. He thought about the 3 days the relay had been down and the fact that Reyes had filed a maintenance request that had gone unanswered for 72 hours before a civilian woman from a supply tent fixed it in 11 minutes. "Because you fixed our relay," he said. "And you didn't report it to him. You fixed it and you just moved on." She looked at him steadily. "Maintenance of operational communications infrastructure is a command responsibility," she said carefully. "When that maintenance is neglected, it creates patterns. Patterns are information." Torres sat with that for a moment. "You're looking at patterns," he said. "Not assets. Patterns." The expression on her face shifted slightly. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression of a person who has watched someone solve a puzzle they weren't sure they were ready to solve. "Get some sleep, Torres," she said. "You said that before." "I meant it before." He stood up. He looked at the device, the maps, the notebook. "The route tomorrow," he said. "The valley route for Alpha Unit. You told him to change it." "I did." "Did he change it?" She went back to her notebook. "I don't know yet," she said. "If he doesn't?" She wrote something in her notebook. Precise, unhurried. "Then that's also information," she said. Torres walked back to his cot. He did not sleep. Colonel Briggs did not change the route. He made this decision at 0630 in his morning command briefing, when Lieutenant Harmon presented the Alpha Unit forward movement plan, and Briggs looked at the valley route and thought about a civilian woman telling him to change it and felt something in his chest that combined irritation and principle in a ratio he would have described, if he'd been honest, as primarily irritation. He did not change the route because he had not gotten to Colonel by taking tactical advice from people who appeared through the gate with a hiking pack and a thermos and no authorization he could verify. He also, it must be said, had not changed the route because something in the way she told him to change it had landed wrong. Not the content of the advice, but the quality of her certainty, the assumption behind it that he would take her word, that she had the standing to offer it. He was aware, in the way a careful man is aware of his own reflexes, that this was not a good reason. He filed that awareness in the category of things he would think about later. Alpha Unit moved out at 0800. At 0947, in the training exercise's simulated forward movement scenario, the lead element at the 2nd kilometer mark in the valley route walked into a simulated ambush scenario that the opposing observation team, also in training, had set up using the exact sightline vulnerability Maya Chun had described the day before in Briggs's office. 12 simulated casualties. The forward element had to pull back and reroute. It added 47 minutes to the exercise. Lieutenant Harmon logged it as a training outcome. Nobody from Alpha Unit knew that a civilian woman in the supply tent had told their CO about the vulnerability 16 hours earlier. Sergeant Price knew because Price watched the CO's morning briefings from the intel section window and had seen the map change discussion and heard the valley route confirmed, and Price had spent the past 2 days quietly building a picture of Maya Chun in her head that was becoming, with each additional data point, significantly more detailed and significantly more interesting. Price said nothing. She added it to her corner. The general arrived on a Thursday. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 4-star, which at FOB Caraway meant a level of seniority that most personnel on base had never been in the physical presence of, and which required a specific protocol of preparation, notification, and arrangement that normally gave a base commander at least 24 hours to get everything in order. General Webb gave FOB Caraway 11 minutes. His helicopter touched down at 0557. The base was awake but not yet in morning formation. The mess hall had been open for 20 minutes. There was coffee. Webb came off the helicopter with 4 members of his security detail and a single aide who was carrying a briefcase and the expression of someone used to moving very quickly through spaces where people were not quite ready for them. Briggs got to the landing pad in 4 minutes. He had managed a uniform, but his coffee was still on his desk. He came to attention. Webb barely looked at him. "Where is she?" Webb said. Briggs blinked. "Sir. Chen. Where is Director Chen?" The word director arrived in the morning air at FOB Caraway and landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples would not finish moving for several days. Briggs looked at his aide. His aide looked at the security detail. Nobody had an immediate answer. Torres, who had been crossing the base from the medical unit to the mess hall for breakfast, stopped. He turned around and walked very quickly to the mess hall. Maya Chun was in the mess hall. She was eating eggs. She had a specific relationship with eggs at this base, Torres had noticed. She ate them every morning with the uncomplicated satisfaction of a person who had not necessarily had reliable access to meals for portions of her life and was not going to take available eggs for granted. Torres came through the mess hall door at something between a walk and a run. "There's a 4-star general on the landing pad," he said. He was slightly out of breath. "He's asking for you." She looked up from her eggs. Something moved in her expression. Not surprise, Torres had come to understand, a complicated relationship with surprise, which was to say she did not appear to have one. But something that looked, if he'd had to name it, like a person reaching the last page of a calculation they've been running for a long time and confirming that the answer came out right. She picked up her tray and walked it to the return station. She picked up her coffee. She walked to the door of the mess hall. General Marcus Webb was already coming through it. They were in a mess hall with approximately 60 soldiers, most of whom had been eating breakfast and were now doing the thing where you are technically still eating breakfast but are actually watching something else entirely. Webb stopped in front of her. He was 6 feet 2. He had 4 stars on his collar and 31 years of service and the particular physical presence of someone who had commanded troops in 4 different theaters of war and had never once, in any room he had entered, been the second most important person. He came to attention. He raised his hand. He saluted. He saluted her first. The mess hall made a sound. It was a collective, involuntary sound, the kind a room makes when 60 people simultaneously process something that violates a category they considered fixed. Kowalski, who was 3 tables from the door, dropped his fork. It hit his tray. In the silence that followed the collective sound, the fork hitting the tray was very loud. Maya Chun returned the salute. "Director Chun," Webb said. "General Webb," she said. He lowered his hand. "I got your preliminary report at 0400, he said. "I came directly. I didn't expect you this quickly." "When you say what you said in a preliminary report," Webb said, "I don't wait for the final." He looked around the mess hall. He looked at the 60 soldiers who were not eating breakfast. He looked at Kowalski, who had still not picked up his fork. He looked at Torres, standing near the door with the expression of a man who has spent 2 days being confused and has just received an answer that is simultaneously complete and also somehow more confusing. "Clear the mess hall," Webb said quietly to his aide. His aide cleared the mess hall. Torres was the last one out. He went because he was told to and also because his legs moved him through the door before his brain had fully caught up to what he'd just seen. He stood in the morning air outside the mess hall. Kowalski was next to him. "Director," Kowalski said. "Director," Torres agreed. They stood there for a moment. "Director of what?" Kowalski said. Torres thought about the relay, the maps, the notebook dense with calculations, the training exercise, the obstacle course and the water bottle, the valley route and the 12 simulated casualties and the sightline vulnerability described 16 hours before it mattered. 3 days of everything, all of it filed, all of it precise, all of it adding up to a picture he had been assembling piece by piece without knowing what picture he was assembling. "Of whatever needs a director," Torres said. Kowalski picked up his fork. He did not have his tray anymore. He looked at the fork. He put it in his pocket. From inside the mess hall, they could hear nothing. What happened inside the mess hall, based on the formal record and the partial accounts of Webb's aide and several other individuals who were present, was this. Webb and Maya Chun sat across from each other at a table in a cleared military mess hall, and she briefed him on her 48-hour assessment of FOB Caraway. The briefing took 19 minutes. It covered, according to the formal record that was later produced, communications infrastructure failures and their operational implications, training protocol deviations from standard doctrine and the command decisions that produced them, logistics irregularities over the preceding 90 days, intelligence cell function and coordination gaps, and one specific, documented pattern of command decision-making that the report described in careful, precise, entirely non-dramatic language as inconsistent with the standards required for secure operational command and consistent with a pattern of conduct under investigation. That pattern, that phrase, those words in that order in a classified preliminary report sent to a 4-star general at 0400 on a Thursday morning. That was why Marcus Webb had gotten on a helicopter at 0430 without calling ahead. It was also why Colonel Wade Briggs was summoned to the mess hall at 0621 and walked through a door to find his 4-star general and the civilian woman who had been sleeping in the supply tent and eating eggs in the mess hall, and telling him to change training routes sitting across from each other at a table that had been cleared for them. Briggs came to attention. Webb looked at him. "Colonel," Webb said, "you know Director Chun." Briggs looked at Maya. He looked at Webb. He looked at the 4 stars. He looked at Maya again. "We've met," he said carefully. "She came through your gate 48 hours ago," Webb said. "Identified herself, presented credentials verbally, stated her purpose, requested appropriate access." A pause. And you put her in the supply tent. The mess hall was very quiet. Briggs said nothing for a moment. There was no good thing to say. He was a man who had been in military command long enough to understand when there was no good thing to say. Sir, he said, I received no verification. The notification went through your command chain 72 hours before Director Chen's arrival, Webb said. The reason you didn't receive it is one of the things she was here to assess. And the reason the relay was down for 3 days, the one she fixed in 11 minutes on her first evening here, is another. He looked at Briggs steadily. The Valley route this morning, Colonel. The Alpha Unit exercise. Briggs was very still. Director Chen briefed you on the sightline vulnerability 24 hours before that exercise, Webb said. You ran the Valley route anyway. Sir, I had no basis to. You had her word, Webb said. Which, it turns out, was sufficient. He paused.
12 simulated casualty, Colonel.
In a training scenario, what does that translate to in a forward deployment? Briggs said nothing. The answer was in the silence. Webb looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Maya Chen. Director. She looked up. Is there anything you need from Colonel Briggs before he's relieved pending review? Maya Chen looked at Colonel Briggs. She looked at him with the same quality of attention she'd brought to everything. The footnote reading attention, the one that didn't perform itself, that just arrived and stayed until it had what it needed. No, she said. Thank you, Colonel. It was entirely polite. It was, in its politeness, more complete than anything else she could have said. Briggs walked out. What happened in the 48 hours after Webb arrived would take longer to fully document than the period it covered, and the documentation that eventually emerged was classified at a level that most of the people in this story never achieved clearance to read. What happened that mattered for the people who were there was simpler. Maya Chen stood in front of the full assembled unit of FOB Caraway that afternoon. Not in a uniform. In the same clothes she'd arrived in, with her thermos, looking at 412 soldiers who had spent 2 days making her the base's best story. She told them what she'd been doing. Not all of it. Not the classified elements. But the shape of it, what an operational assessment was, what it looked for, what it meant that she'd been here, what it meant for the forward units whose routes had been adjusted through channels they hadn't known existed, what it meant that the base's secondary communications relay was now functional. She talked for 22 minutes. The base was very quiet. At the end, she said, the work that keeps units safe is usually invisible. It's done by people you don't know in rooms you don't have access to for reasons that will never appear in a briefing you receive. I want you to understand that the invisibility is not an accident. The invisibility is the job. She paused. You all did good work here. The problems that existed were command problems, not capability problems. That matters. She picked up her thermos. She was done. Torres raised his hand. She looked at him. The obstacle course, he said. Were you clocking Kowalski's recovery? Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Physical readiness metrics are part of a standard operational assessment, she said. Were you clocking him? The corner of her mouth moved again. Further this time. Almost something. He has excellent upper body transfer, she said. Tell him I said so. She walked to the back of the assembled unit. She walked through the base. She walked to the supply tent, where her bunk was still neatly made, and she picked up her backpack, which was already packed because she had packed it that morning, and she walked to the gate. Sergeant Price was at the gate. She had not coincidentally arranged to be there. She had absolutely deliberately arranged to be there, because Price collected corners and this was the last corner and she intended to be in it. Maya Chun came through the gate from the inside. She stopped when she saw Price. Price came to attention. She did not salute, the protocol was complicated, and what Price offered was something different from salute, something closer to acknowledgement, the acknowledgement one professional extends to another professional when the quality of their work has been recognized without being stated. Maya Chun looked at her. You knew, Maya Chun said. It was not a question. Not what, Price said. But something. The perimeter walk. First morning. I watched where you stopped. Maya nodded slowly. Satellite array, motor pool, emergency relay station. She paused. You filed it and waited. That's my habit, Price said. Maya-chun looked at her for a moment. Really looked, the way she looked at things, as though she was memorizing the architecture. Good habit, she said. Hold on to it. She shifted her backpack. Your unit's going to need people who watch where things stop. She walked through the gate. Price watched her go. Down the road, back toward the direction of the helicopter pad, toward whatever came next in the life of a woman who moved through military installations like information moved through a good network, without announcing itself, without requiring permission, only making itself known when it arrived exactly where it was supposed to be. Price stood at the gate for a moment after she was gone. Then she smiled. One small, private, professional smile. The smile of a person who had been quietly right about something for 2 days and had never needed anyone to tell her so. She went back to work. Torres found Kowalski that evening in the break room. He told him what Maya-chun had said about the obstacle course, about the upper body transfer. Kowalski was quiet for a moment. She was clocking me the whole time, he said. Yes. Not competing. Assessing. Yes. Another pause. Kowalski looked at the ceiling. He did the thing that large, confident men sometimes do when they encounter information that requires them to revise a story they've been telling, the brief, private recalibration that happens before the new story settles in. Ha! He said. Yeah, Torres said. She's good. She's very good. The relay, Kowalski said. The route. The exercise predictions. All of it. Kowalski picked up his coffee. He drank some. He set it down. You talked to her, he said. At 0300. In the supply tent. Torres didn't ask how Kowalski knew that. Information moved fast at FOB Caraway. Yeah, he said. What did she say? Torres thought about 0300 in the supply tent. The maps, the device, the notebook, the low directional light. The question he'd asked and the answer he'd gotten. In my experience, the most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody thought to watch. She had picked up her coffee when she said it. She had said it with the same flat, precise, undramatic quality she brought to every statement she made, as though it were information she was providing rather than wisdom she was offering. Get some sleep, Torres. He had not slept. She told me to get some sleep, Torres said. Kowalski looked at him. Did you? Torres picked up his coffee. No, he said. They sat there for a while in the break room of FOB Caraway, where a 4-star general had saluted a woman eating eggs that morning, where a supply tent had been a command center for 2 nights, where a relay had been broken and was now fixed, and where a valley route had been taken at cost and would not be taken again. Outside, the base resumed its ordinary sounds. The sounds it made when the thing that had passed through it was already gone and the ordinary world had moved to fill the space. Torres looked out the window. He thought about the last thing she'd said to the assembled unit. The invisibility is not an accident. The invisibility is the job. He thought about 48 hours. He thought about everything a person could observe, assess, document, and transmit in 48 hours if they knew what to look for and had the mind to look for it and the discipline to do nothing dramatic with what they found until the moment drama was the correct choice. He thought about a woman who had arrived through a gate with a backpack and a thermos. He thought about a general who had come off a helicopter and asked where is she before he'd taken a second breath. He thought about Kowalski's fork hitting the tray. He thought about Sergeant Price at the gate, watching Maya-chun walk away, smiling the small private professional smile of a person who had been right about something from the beginning. Torres, Kowalski said. Yeah. You think we'll see her again? Torres thought about that. He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about things, with the genuine curiosity of a man who wanted the real answer rather than the comfortable one. I think, he said slowly, she's already at the next place. He looked out the window. And they have no idea she's there. Somewhere south of FOB Caraway, on a road that didn't carry much traffic at that hour, a woman with a backpack and a thermos of coffee watched the landscape move past the window of a transport vehicle and made notes in a small blue-inked notebook. Her notes were precise, efficient, without waste. She was already running the first calculations on the next thing. She didn't look back. She never looked back. That was not indifference. That was mathematics. When you know something is done, you move to what isn't. There was always something that wasn't done yet. She had a list.